Welcome everybody to our Lunch and Learn with Herren Project. I'm very excited for today's topic. We have Joe Landry here from Discovery Place in Tennessee. Welcome back, Joe. Love having you on. I am Kristin Young. I'm the clinical director from Herren Project, and I will let Joe introduce himself and tell us a little bit about what the topic is for today.
Okay. Hey, Kristin. Yeah, super glad to be here. Always love getting to chat with you at lunch and always have a good time. So I'm the outreach director for a little nonprofit in Tennessee called Discovery Place, and we're a long-term men's recovery program.
And you guys are awesome. And they don't pay me to say that, I swear. They really don't. They are awesome.
I'll send you a check after the show. Yeah. But yeah, so we, one of the things, I mean, the quick and skinny is that everybody at Discovery Place that works here got sober at Discovery Place. So we're all in recovery and kind of know where the men have been and try to carry that message. So about today's topic, you and I have spoken a few times about this, but one of the things that was real true in my story and in a lot of men's stories that I talk to is, having I guess not a great experience with 12-step programs.
Yes.
And, and I think a lot of that might have to do with what we're going to talk about, which is what the difference is between a 12-step fellowship and a 12-step program. I think, just societally and through Hollywood, we have this idea of what, AA or NA or CA or any of these A's are. And that's, a bunch of kind of folks sitting in a smoky church basement, drinking stale coffee and, talking about, how terrible it is to not drink anymore. And, I don't know exactly what we think, I know that I thought something along those lines.
Right.
And so, going into, my recovery, with that sort of mindset, I was expecting some things to happen that just weren't possible to happen just going to meetings. And so yeah, that's hopefully what we're going to talk about today is, what is the difference between 12-step recovery and a 12-step fellowship?
Yeah. And I love this topic. In my experience, most of the time, especially working with families, your loved ones, our loved ones, at some point will say that just doesn't work for me.
Right.
Right. And I think that there's a part of that may be true for some people because there's many different pathways to recovery. Right. But then there's also that piece that oftentimes they're not ready. So I want to throw that in as a topic to add to our discussion as well, because it is something that families struggle with. And one of the things that I've done in some of my group work is go through the 12 steps and have somebody who's in recovery come and speak on each step. So families kind of have an idea of what it is that our loved ones are doing and talking about, because as far as I'm concerned, as a therapist, we should all be doing the 12 steps. This should not be something that is, only offered to people in recovery anymore, because the 12 steps and 12-step work, it's evidence-based. It helps people progress. It helps people take responsibility for their own actions, right? It's a great program. There are some drawbacks to it, obviously, which we can talk about, and the things that aren't necessarily one size fits all. But the 12 steps themselves, I think they're pretty great. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think to your point, 12-step recovery does not have a monopoly on getting sober and staying sober.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a million pathways and a lot of great things out there. And like you said, one shoe doesn't fit all.
Right.
I personally have tried a bunch of different ways, and honestly, I can look at was I ready, and probably not, and all that type of stuff, and who really knows at the end of the day, why when I flopped up on the sidewalk here, X amount of years ago, that I was finally ready to hear some things and do something different. I don't know, but for me personally, what that looked like was digging into what was going on with me sober. And that's what the 12 steps are designed to do. If you take a look at them, the steps, not the meetings, of course, the first step is the only step that even discusses alcohol or drugs.
Right. Yep.
So there's just a concession in step one. And that just says like, okay, can I admit to myself, can I get honest with myself that when I drink or drug, I I have an increasing sensitivity and I lose control over the amount I take.
Yep.
Can I just come to terms with that? That, I start drinking and I say I'm only going to have two, and that two turns into 10, or I have the rent money due on Friday and I really want to not be homeless, but then I decide I'm just going to spend a little bit of that rent money. And the next thing you know, I have no money
Right.
and I'm having to steal or not pay the landlord, or, can I just admit that there are some people out there that can safely use alcohol and even recreationally maybe use drugs? We don't have any opinion on whether that's good or bad or whatever.
Right.
But can I just admit that I'm not one of those?
Yeah, absolutely. And I always like to throw out when this topic comes up, it's actually not the best choice for any of us, right? I'm going to
Right,
throw my
right.
opinion out. I'm not going to say that nobody should ever drink or, smoke a little pot here or there. We would never say it's okay with heroin or anything else, right? But with those two drugs, but it is never the best choice for any of us, whether we have substance use disorder or not. So
Right.
I always like to throw that out there because I feel like a lot of us think that because it's so societally acceptable, that means it's okay. And
Sure.
okay is debatable. We could have an hour-long discussion about what okay means, but at the end of the day, the reality is it's never the best choice. There's
Mhm.
always a better choice that you could make than having even a glass of wine or smoking a joint, right?
Agreed. Yeah. And, so as you take a look at that first step and say, okay, I've conceded, and the discussion I have with a lot of men is like, look, man, you're in treatment.
Yeah.
It got bad enough. So, some folks had to, spend some serious money to get you in here. There were flights booked. There's charges pending. I mean, there's all this wreckage as a result of drinking and drugging. It's pretty safe to say that, you're not one of those folks that can just take it or leave it.
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
definitely controlling your life. And so once we come to terms with that, though, then the rest of the 12 steps, part two of step one, that my life has become unmanageable, moving all the way forward, deal with my internal condition and my relationships with other human beings.
Which is the stuff that all of us could benefit from,
Right.
right?
That's exactly it.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I forgot to kind of tell everybody what they're supposed to do in my excitement to talk about the topic. So we are open for your questions. If you are on the Zoom platform, please put your questions in the Q&A button down the bottom of your screen. If you are on Facebook Live, you can put your questions right in the comment section and they will get to us. So feel free to throw your questions out. We'll try to get to them all. We love to answer questions. It's what makes this so fun for us. So throw them out there when you guys are ready. Try not to put too much identifying information in them. We will try to make sure we don't read any identifying information, but we want to keep you and your loved ones anonymous as possible, because this is not a confidential webinar by any means. It's out there on Facebook. It's going to go up on websites. So just be aware of that. So sorry, Joe, go ahead.
Yeah. So, when it comes to the rest of these steps, we're talking about the internal condition, we're talking about our relationships, we're talking about really a design for living.
Yeah.
It is what it is. It's a framework to, interact with the world in a different way that is potentially going to produce a more positive result internally and externally in our life. And if you really look at it, most every human, but certainly, folks struggling with, alcohol and drugs, the relationships in my life and in our lives are just not going well.
Right.
Whether that's at work or with family or romantically. And so it's really easy, I think, to put all the emphasis and blame on the drug or the drink and say, like, okay, well, as a result of my drinking and drugging, yes, I did some kind of bad things and I stole and I spent this money and I got some charges and, I screamed at you that one time when I was drunk, or, whatever it is. But if you strip that away, we strip away the consequences that are directly linked to drinking and drugging. And then we just talk about, how we interact with people stone cold sober.
Right.
For me personally, and a lot of the men I've worked with, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done. And so I'm specifically a person who, has a lot of fear. Didn't think I did, thought I was someone who wasn't scared of anything. The truth is I'm scared of everything. And
Right.
it's this self-centered fear. What do you think of me? How's it going to play out? Well,
Right.
and I have this just swirling around inside me. And as a result of that, I start interacting with you to try to quash that fear in
Right.
a certain way.
Yep.
And so, you know, eh, taking away the drink, taking away the drug, that's a really hard way to live life. Is thinking I know what's best, being crippled by fear, while at the same time thinking I'm, the greatest person in the world and the lowest pond scum all in the same second, and just having lots of this internal struggle. And the best solution I've ever found to that is alcohol and drugs.
And it
When I
works.
get really,
I always
and
like
it
to throw
worked.
that out there. It works. Our loved ones are not using drugs and alcohol because they want to ruin their lives. They start originally, like you were saying, all that pain, start using because it works.
You're exactly right, and it's progressive. It really is, and so I think that's one of the things that kept me out there so long, is that there was a time in my life where alcohol and drugs worked really well,
Mhm.
and it wasn't destroying my life. I
Exactly.
had some modicum of control over what
Yep.
was happening, but years into that switch where I'd lost control, I was still trying to get back to that place. Only it had been almost a decade, and my life was completely burned to the ground.
Right. And
But
I want to throw out here too, Joe, that that's actually neurological, because I think a lot of people don't really understand that this isn't just you deciding that you wanted to try to get back there. There's actually the subconscious place in your brain that deals with survival, learned that the drug helped you survive. So that part of your brain, again, subconscious. So this isn't conscious thought. The part of your brain is constantly driving you to go back to the drug, even though it's not working anymore, even though it's causing more problems than it's solving. Your subconscious mind doesn't know that because it's not complex. It's not capable of complex thought. It just learns what helped you survive. So that part of the brain was driving you back, constantly driving you back to go back to the drug. So essentially, our loved ones are fighting their own nervous system. That's hard, really hard.
powerful,
Mhm.
yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about this idea of 12-step meetings, 12-step fellowship, if you want to call it. And so we've talked a little bit about recovery and the problem, that's what's going on, but let's think about you know this idea that I'm going to go. Let's say I went to a meeting every single day.
Yep.
Let's say I get out of a treatment
30,
center,
right?
go to my meeting every single day. I walk into the meeting, I sit down, they do some readings, some people share, maybe I share, maybe I don't. The meeting is over, and then I drive home.
Yep.
Okay, so that's an hour. Now, so let's just kind of break down what actually goes on there. So maybe I hear something,
Mhm.
maybe I feel connected. And these are all positive things. So maybe I hear something that's like, oh, that kind of brings me a little hope. I heard someone share that they were like me and now they're better. And so now I'm given this little piece of hope. And
Right.
then I connect with other folks that are in recovery. And that is a massive part of this deal for sure. So the way it was broken down for me is that it's a three-legged stool. And so the three legs of the stool are going to be the fellowship or unity, recovery, which is the 12 steps, and service.
Mhm.
And when all three of those legs are functioning as a design for this new life, which means I'm working on myself internally, I'm participating in this recovery world, and visiting with other people that are in recovery and feeling that connection, and then I'm also being of service to my community, then all those pistons are firing, and I begin to feel and experience this thing called recovery,
Right.
where I get better internally, my life gets better externally.
Yep.
But I think the old idea is that all we need is the meetings,
Yeah. Right.
and so my personal experience with that is that my first AA meeting was in 10/15/98 was my first sobriety date. And then I got sober this last time at Discovery Place, June 25th of 2015.
Right.
So that's 18 years
Mhm.
of in and out
Right.
and going to meetings and
Yeah.
doing the dance and, saying AA doesn't work and NA doesn't work, all this kind of stuff, because the truth, and it's really hard. It was really hard for me to admit this, because the guy sat me down when I first got sober and I was like, man, 12 step doesn't work. Doesn't work. And he said, well, cool. Have you ever done them?
Right. And you were like, what?
I was like, well, man, I do. Like, I've been going to NA and AA and I've had a year clean. And he's like, well, cool. He's like, so did you ever do the 12 steps? And I was like, well, I mean, I went to, so no. I was like, well, I guess not, but and that seems silly saying that out loud right now, but you'd be surprised how many hundreds of men I've sat down and had that identical conversation with. And what do you know? The first time I thoroughly went through the 12 steps and then began to apply them to my life, it's been, almost 7 years since I've had a drink or a drug. And it's just amazing how we can, and I think that brings us to the topic, which is like, what is that? Is that something that was ingrained in us that all we got to do is go get our meeting sheet signed? What is that? Like, what's the idea that keeps us thinking we've done AA or NA or 12-step deal when we've never even done the program?
Right. Would you mind just giving us an overview of what each step is? Just a quick little blurb on what are our loved ones being asked to do?
100%. Yeah. So step one, the first 3 steps really are just internal concessions. There's no action required. So step one is just this admittance that I can't drink and drug successfully. That's what powerlessness is. Then my life has become unmanageable. That is the inability to manage the decision to stay sober. There's a lot more to it as we dig into the work, but the overview is, I say I'm never going to drink again. And to manage that decision, that means I stick to it, I take action toward it, and then I bring about the desired result. Apparently, I can't manage that decision because I've said I'm never going to drink again about 300 times. And there I am drinking again. Step 2 is that we come to believe that it's possible for this thing to work. Now, the actual step says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. But really what that means is, like, A, do I believe I'm this person in step 1? And then B, do I believe it's possible that I can get better?
Right.
And the way that worked for me was I saw some other men that I believed to be drinking and drugging like I was, and they did, but now they were recovered.
Right. That's really powerful too. That peer piece is very powerful.
It was everything for me. I needed some real evidence. And, I have a master BS meter inside me, like a lot of addicts do. And so, when I sat down with a guy, he, said, look, man, here's what it looked like for me. And I couldn't, none of that BS meter was going off. But then almost in the next thought, I was looking at him and I was like, but you don't look like me. You don't sound like me. Like your life is really good. And it was powerful, and so I began to get that hope. And then so that transitions us right into step 3, which is that we make a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care and direction and guidance of something bigger than us.
That's right.
And so for me, what that looked like was I looked at this guy, Matt, and I was like, dude, I'm broken. I don't know what to do. You seem like you've got some sort of answer. You were like me. Tell me what to do. And he started giving me some very simple direction based on what he had done. Not just, he didn't make it up. Right. He just said, man, here's what I did specifically on a daily basis. And then I started taking that direction. Now, that's just the first 3 steps, which, super important. Got to get that done. But that's not even the work. Right. The work begins when we get into what's referred to as the house cleaning portion of the steps. And so we make the decision in step 3, we launch into step 4, and that is that we make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Yeah. And what that looks like in the fellowship that I participate in is a 3 inventory. So we take a look at our resentments, we take a look at our relationships, and we say, here's what's been blocking me off. And we get down to some causes and conditions. We take a look at fear. We take a look at what sort of fear is driving us and what sort of actions we take on fear. And then we look at our sexual conduct, and we take a look at the selfishness of that. We take a look at what we're bringing to the table in our romantic relationships, and how we, in my experience anyway, I have the same relationship over and over and over and over and over again with different women, because I'm bringing the exact same thing to every single one of those relationships. And then we begin to take a look at what a more sane and sound ideal for our future relations would look like. And then we strive toward that. And then in step 5, we share all that. Right. We sit down with another man, and we share all the dark crannies of our past, and the things that we're embarrassed about, and the things that we said we'd take to the grave with us. And really, for me, that's where this thing began to take off, because there were some things that I had done and I'd experienced and I'd been through that I was never going to let see the light of day. I was so ashamed and scared, and
And isn't it amazing how powerful it is when it stays inside, and then how much power is just drops away from it once you finally say it out loud, right? And by the way, I also want to say, this is why a lot of your loved ones don't make it to step 4, because this is hard. It's a one that it can take somebody a lot of tries and a lot of times before they're able to actually delve into this, because it's scary to look at that stuff.
It's frightening. And what's really interesting that I've found, it's just crazy funny, but the things that men are really scared to share about are not what you would suspect. It's like I've sat down with a lot of guys that will say, like, man, I stole my aunt's or grandma's pain pills, and that, and they do feel some shame around that, for sure.
Yeah,
that's not the thing they're scared to tell me.
That's the testing. That's the early stages of, I'm gonna throw a few things out there and test the waters and see what happens.
Like, and this is going to sound kind of crazy or psychopathic, but however you take it, but like we know that you're supposed to feel bad about that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I know that, like, I'm supposed to feel bad about that, but in my addiction, in my insanity, like, for me and a lot of men I've worked, it never really registered. Like the full breadth of, like, the shame and the guilt and all the things that were associated with a lot of these things, like, for me, didn't hit till much later, after I was sober. So that first intro into the steps, the things that were keeping me sick were the secrets. The things that were keeping me sick were, like, to be honest with you, it was like weird things that happened when I was 10 or 11, and stuff I just had weird guilt and shame about, and thought I was different, and thought nobody would understand, and I was a bad boy, and all these things. And so when I sat down with this other man, my sponsor, for the first time, the way he did it with me was, he sat down and he just, like, hit me with 2 or 3 of his things, like, right off the rip. And I was like, oh, that's what we're doing here, and it made me feel comfortable. And then I began to share these things with him. And as I shared them, a couple of times he looked at me and he said, man, I'm really sorry that happened to you. And I'd never heard that in my life.
Right.
I'd never just gotten an acknowledgement of the things that I'd been through in my pain. And that's something, for me, the most important thing when I'm working with a new man. When a man gets vulnerable and sits down and shares something like that, with me or with anyone, I think it's important to say, man, I'm sorry that happened to you. And then we begin to talk about a solution to it. But the other thing he said to me is that, he said, man, I've done the same thing. I've experienced the same thing. And there was so much power in that connection,
Right. Absolutely.
So, as we go through, the steps, I don't know how in depth you want me to get here.
I think just we've got questions that are flying in now. But just like a quick overview of the rest of them, of what the idea is, and then we'll delve into answering some of the questions.
Yep. 6 and 7 basically is, character defects, shortcomings. We get the list of those when we, do steps 4 and 5. And these are, you can call them defense mechanisms. You can call them whatever you want to call them. That looks like, I get scared, my go-to is anger. I get scared, or my feelings hurt, I will sulk or silent scorn. So these are the tools that I learned somewhere probably in the third grade. And then
Yeah.
I started drinking and drugging, and I emotionally developed like across a straight line.
Right.
So if you notice your loved one or yourself that's 30 or 40 or 50 years old and they're behaving like your 10-year-old, it's because emotionally we just really stopped developing. And I was a 33-year-old kid,
Right.
for lack of a better word. And so 6 and 7, we begin to take a look at that stuff. 8 is we make a list of all the persons we've harmed. 9, we go out and we make direct amends. That looks like financial. That looks like sitting down with people that I've harmed and saying, man, I wronged you. Not saying I'm sorry. Like, I wronged you. Here's how I wronged you. And then saying, is there anything I can do to make this right?
Yeah.
And then being willing to do that stuff.
Right.
So I'm mending the relationship, not just saying I'm sorry. Because for my loved ones anyway, they'd heard me say I'm sorry 1,000 times.
Right.
And I'm sorry wasn't going to cut it anymore.
Doesn't mean anything after a while. Any family member knows that's been into, you stop believing in the I'm sorry's actually mean a thing because you hear them so frequently.
That's right. And then as we get into 10, 11, and 12, they're what's referred to as the maintenance steps. So 10, 11, and 12 is what we do on a daily basis. That's what long-term recovery looks like. So 1, 2, and 3, they're these concessions. I can't, maybe there's something that can. Tell me what to do. Steps 1, 2, and 3. 4 through 9 is the house cleaning. I do the inventory work. I take a look at myself. I go and take that stuff out in the world, and I begin to make my relationships better. And then I maintain that condition on a daily basis through 10, 11, and 12. And step 10 is I continue to take inventory. Am I selfish? Am I dishonest? Am I fearful? Am I jealous? What's going on with my condition today? It's almost like doing maintenance on a car.
Right.
And when one of those things crops up, it's like the check engine light. And then I have a solution to apply to my life and then begin to do something different in those relationships. 11 is seeking through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with whatever sort of higher power that we've decided to believe in, whether that's, a specific God, or that's, the 12-step fellowship, whatever it is. And then 12 is really the nuts and bolts where we go out in the world and we carry that message to the next recovering alcoholic. But then the most important part is that we apply the principles to our daily life in all our affairs.
Yep.
And so that looks like honesty, integrity, open-mindedness, willingness, humility, etc. There's a spiritual principle behind each one of the 12 steps.
Right.
And so applying those to our life as a way of life is how we bring this newfound result in our relationships and in our internal condition.
Yep. And this is the stuff, for the audience that I think could be so beneficial to all of us. And just so everyone out there's aware, Al-Anon is also a 12-step program, and they do have their own set of steps that you can go through to do similar work yourself, which is really important for us as family members. We really have to do some work ourselves. Al-Anon's a great tool. It doesn't necessarily have to be Al-Anon, just like we were talking about at the beginning. There are many pathways to recovery for us as well. There's a lot of other ways to do it, but it's really important that we mention, if your loved one is doing this, you need to be doing something for yourself as well, because while they're getting well, it's super important that you yourself are also starting to look at your behaviors that are contributing to keeping this process going. Not blaming you at all, but we do have some behaviors that participate with their behaviors that continue a cycle of addiction. So we got to really look at that. So what Joe's talking about right now, we have our own set of 12 steps in Al-Anon if you want to give that a try, or get yourself in personal therapy or do something like that. But while they're doing the work, we need to do the work. And one of the ways that I can tell when someone's serious about their recovery is when they start asking their loved ones to do work too, right? All of a sudden, I'll have someone go, well, my husband, wife, son is really happy I'm coming to these groups. And that's when okay, they're serious. They want us to do work too, because they know that there's two sides to this street, right? So I just want to throw that out there that this is real serious work that Joe's talking about, and we kind of got to do some of it too in order to have a healthy family dynamic. So now I'll throw some questions out to you. We got a few. What should you look for in finding a sponsor?
It's a great question. And I've had all sorts of ideas about that over the last 20 odd years of in and out. And, let's start with what's something that's maybe a common misconception. And so for me, that was like, I got to find someone I really relate to.
Yeah.
And this is going to sound kind of crass, but I came up in a little bit of a, hard knocks 12-step life. But, I asked the guy earlier, I was like, well, I'm trying to find someone I relate to. And he said, well, why don't you go down to the county jail? You'll probably find some people down there that you relate to, And so, like this idea that I'm going to, like, I'm going to find this guy that like, oh, we both like to play hockey, or, he likes country music. And it's one of those things where I don't know where we get that from. I think it's just, probably pretty natural to want to like be connected with someone that you relate to on all these kind of like cursory levels or whatever. But really what they say and what has proven to be true for me is that find someone that you want what they've got. Now, that doesn't mean the BMW and the wife or whatever.
Right.
What that looks like is I wanted someone who was comfortable in their own skin.
Right.
And my sponsor, Don, he's that guy. We kind of jokingly call him the Clint Eastwood of AA, but he's just he's kind of a very stoic dude. And I, thought I was this guy or whatever, but the truth was I was just completely dominated by the actions of other people and what you thought about me. And it was just a miserable way to live. And so I saw Don just being himself, and I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was, but he just didn't, not that he didn't care, but he just wasn't impacted. Like his internal condition was okay, whether you liked him or didn't like him, or, whatever was going on, he had some peace about him. And so I wanted that. And so he said, man, if you want that, here's what I did to get it. So if you want what I've got, you do what I did. And, I know that sounds super simple, and there's probably a lot of people like, yeah, well, that's super simple, but you'd be surprised,
right.
Especially folks like me. I want the shortest path. I want the results. I want to be the Clint Eastwood of AA, but I don't want to do any work.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the nature of the disease, Joe, right?
Yeah.
Like at the beginning, that's where most people who have been using substances, because substances are a quick and easy fix. So that's what you're used to. That's what you look for. You don't even know there's another way at first.
Yeah. So for kind of more, I guess, just specific instruction on the finding the sponsor, you want a man who's been through the 12 steps.
Right.
So if you're in a meeting and you're looking for a sponsor, you want a guy who's talking about the solution. And the solution is, drum roll, the 12 steps.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, even in Nashville where I am, and there's really strong recovery here, but you could go on a Monday night to a meeting on the west side of town or a meeting on the east side of town and have two completely different experiences.
Right.
So now I think that, God's got it, and, all that, and my judgment of good, bad, or indifferent or whatever is off the table. But for me personally, I want to be involved in people that are talking about their lives getting better.
Yeah.
I want to be surrounded by people who are talking about a solution and talking about change. And so another one of those old ideas is that we're going to sit around in this circle and we're going to talk about our problems. And we're going to talk about our problems. And then as a result of that, we're going to connect on this kind of like, it's almost like, what do they call it? Like the trauma bonding.
Oh, to the trauma bonds. Oh, trauma bonds are.
Right. I'm not, you're the clinician, all I know is that I have done that.
Yeah.
And there's like this weird, like, oh, we've been through this, and we kind of like just we stay in that problem with no solution. And it does feel good for a minute, but there's no change that takes place.
Right.
That's my experience anyway.
Yeah. Well,
there was
trauma bonds. You usually feel a lot of passion in the beginning, like and I mean this not just in romantic sense, it can be in a friendship sense too. There's like an overwhelming like sense of like excitement and relief or whatever. And then it just typically leads to more drama, right? It doesn't actually lead to healing because you're together, not as two separate individuals who are choosing to share, right? You actually become symbiotic and need each other, and all of your dysfunction is what brought you together. So what do you think is in the forefront, the majority of the time, right? It's the dysfunction. Happens a lot in relationships, but it happens a lot in friendships too. And definitely with sponsors, I can see that happening. If you're with somebody, if you find somebody that hasn't themselves done a lot of work, that I think for me is the crux of it. Find somebody that has done work themselves and is fairly self-aware.
That's the last thing you just said, self-awareness. Now, I think me being self-aware today looks like I'm pretty sure I'm still super delusional about a bunch of stuff. I don't know exactly what that stuff is because the nature of the delusion is that I believe these things, but I'm pretty sure, and the reason I'm pretty sure is that I can look back at, of course, 7 years ago and see that I was completely out of my mind. But I
Yeah.
can also look back at 1 year ago.
And see,
I can look back at 1 year ago and be like, wow, my perception was really skewed on a lot of things. And that
right.
was after having done a lot of work and all that. And that's okay. That's all part of the journey and the process and the peeling of the onion or whatever you want to call it. But, getting to a point in my life today where I can just say, you know what, maybe I don't know, maybe there's a lot of things to be revealed still.
Yep.
Because if I get to a place, especially in the work that I do, where I'm constantly talking about recovery and steps and get, all this type of stuff, it can get easy to say, well, I've learned this stuff and now I'm good.
Oh yeah, right.
Now I'm good.
You're speaking my language, Joe. I often say, I feel like the sanest of us are the ones that know we're insane. Right? And we have some idea of what our insanity is. We might not know all of it, but we know it's there and we've been working on it and we know there's probably more to come, right? It's the people that think that they've got it all figured out. Those are the ones that I fear a little bit more, right? Because I don't think there's very many of us besides like maybe the original Buddha and Jesus Christ that had everything figured out. And I bet even they probably had some areas that were a little iffy, right?
No doubt about it. Yeah. And well, it's funny, one of the things I do with guys in groups is I'll say like, all right, gentlemen, I want you to all imagine all the drugs and alcohol you've ever put in your body sitting in this room right now.
Mm-hmm.
They all kind of like, well, it wouldn't even fit. There's all kind of the same responses. And I'll say like, all right, well, the alcohol and drugs, of course, has a super negative impact on the brain and the way we process information. I said, just visualizing all of that, kilos and pounds of weed and fifths of whiskey. And is it possible or potentially probable that our thinking is a little skewed?
Yeah.
Is it probable? And of course, they're like, well, yeah, probably pretty messed up, man. And then you couple that with just the stuff that every human's got,
Yep.
which is, fear and insecurity and, the way we process things and false evidence appearing real and all this type of stuff. And then you throw that into a mind that's been warped over many years with drugs and alcohol and other, behavior, then it's probably not a great idea. The culmination of this little exercise is it a great idea to be my own source of information?
Right. Yeah.
And still to this day, 7 years in recovery and externally, life is great, and internally getting a lot better. But still to this day, I need to run things by people. I need to talk.
This is actually one of the things that I wish could get out there to the general public, Joe, because I, on my own personal journey with life and with substance use disorder, not personally, but with family members, have actually learned I have to do the same thing. Right. So yeah, I never resorted to, I did actually use drugs and alcohol. I was genetically protected in some way. Right. And I didn't end up with substance use disorder, but I still have a warped sense of self. I still have had a warped sense of a perception of the world and my place in it. And for family members, our ability to control our loved ones is very warped, right? So we try to grab on to this false sense of control because we feel like if we don't do it, they're going to die. And our loved one, I mean, it's a reality, right? But it's a false sense of control. And we're relying on it so heavily through our own warped perception of self and the world that we need to do that too. We need to figure out that we actually need to run these things by other people, because there's, I mean, I often tell the story, but in my life, I legitimately thought that my ex-husband was going to die without me. Like that he would cease to exist in this. He could not. And this wasn't just about drug use. This was like, I literally didn't think he could manage activities of daily life at 33 years old. Right? Like how much power did I think I had over the universe and him to think that that's pretty warped thinking, right? That I couldn't leave because if I left, he was not going to be able to feed himself. The man had known how to use a fork for a lot of years, right? Like it's a very warped sense of self. So we got to do that too. This is part of our work, is learning to call ourselves out on that and run it by other people so they can say, you know what? It's a little grandiose, right? That doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense. And you can kind of get it out of here because this warps a lot of things. Right.
You're so right. I mean, it's that, so when I'm afraid of losing, a loved one, or if it's something important to me anyway, like there's no way for me to have an unbiased perspective on the situation.
No.
It's just impossible.
Yep.
But having, folks in Al-Anon, or whether that's, whatever 12-step fellowship you're in, and saying like, hey, here's what's going on with me. And they have no emotional attachment to that specific situation and have nothing but a sincere desire to see us do well and be happy. Based on that, they can give a unique perspective that like we just cannot see.
Right. I mean, I'm a licensed clinician. This is why I don't treat my family or people I love.
That's it.
Right. Yeah. I can't see things clearly. My niece actually asked me, she's little and she was struggling with someone in school and she's like, I can just come see you, right, Auntie? And I was like, no, I love you too much. I want to strangle that little girl in school. Like I can't be unbiased. Right. You can't do it.
Right.
2 more questions. Is there a difference between the fellowships, AA versus NA?
Great question. Yeah. So obviously Narcotics Anonymous versus Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, so I participate in any fellowship really. I struggled with all those specific things. I happen to find my solution in one of them though, just I think because the fellowship itself was really strong. But yes, I mean, if you're primarily into drugs, then Narcotics Anonymous is for you. If you're primarily into alcohol, then Alcoholics Anonymous is for you. Now, that brings up a really good point, which is, okay, so that's the fellowship. So that's just some people in a room for an hour a day, potentially, probably more like 3 hours a week, 4 hours a week, if you're really doing the deal. So what about the other 23 hours of the day? What about, and that's the work. And so that kind of brings me to this next point, which is, especially for loved ones, if you've been seeing this, now I'm just going to describe to you what happened to me and what has happened to literally thousands of dudes that I've worked with. And that is, I burn it all to the ground. I go to treatment. I get 4 months sober and I relapse. So what's going on there? Now, here's what happened with me, and here's what's been going on with a lot of men that I've worked with. The fellowship itself, they're like, they were going to meetings. I was going to meetings. Everything was going great. Then all of a sudden, boom. Now, it's to the point you brought up earlier, which is that it is very powerful, that first few months, of being connected with these other people that understand. And I can just go to the meetings, drink the Starbucks, go sober bowling, just participate in the fellowship of a 12-step program and get a lot of relief. But that relief is short-lived.
Because there's
and so there's no recovery that's coming with it. So nothing's actually changing, and so whether that's like a serious connection with a group of men or women or whatever it is, just the feeling of feeling a part of, whatever it is, I'm feeling great. I'm on this journey. I'm physically feeling better because I'm not detoxing from alcohol and drugs anymore. My urinalysis are coming back clean at the PO, like some good things are happening in my life. I'm not doing felonies before breakfast. Life is getting better externally.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of folks will then say, well, I'm good. Why do I need to do the 12 steps? And my experience personally and with a lot of men is that I'm about a 3 to 6 month guy.
Yeah.
It takes me about 3 to 6 months for me to rebuild some sort of semblance of an external life. But then the thing that was going on with me that, where I kept reaching for the solution of alcohol and drugs for so long was still there.
Right.
And nothing had changed. I had no solution. I had no solution to my fear. I had no solution to how sensitive I was. I had no solution to my restlessness and my irritability and my inability to be in reality. And the next thing you know, the wind blew on a Wednesday at 2 p.m. and I was drinking again.
Yeah. I mean, and I like to say that because what you're talking about is actually the problem, right? The drug use is a symptom. The drug and alcohol use is a symptom. Does it create more problems? Absolutely. But it wasn't the problem, right? You found a solution to the problem in the drugs. So we need to stop looking at the drug and alcohol use like it's the problem, because it's not the problem. It's a problem that needs to be solved, but then there's a bigger problem that predated it that's underneath it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the easiest way to state that as fact is that sober me makes the decision to get high every time.
Right. Yep.
It's sober me,
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, like when I'm addicted physically to alcohol and drugs, yes, there's a physical craving and I'm full blown and I need it every single day, or I'm going to physically be sick and blah, blah, blah. But then if you're anything like me and you're listening or your loved one, I'll go to jail or I'll go to treatment or whatever will happen to force me into sobriety, which is abstinence from alcohol and drugs. But then 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months, 4 months later, the sober me goes, you know what? I know I had said I'm never going to do that again. And my whole family got on board and paid for my treatment. And, my life is going great, but let's try that one more time. And then boom, it sets the cycle of motion again. And then that sensitivity to alcohol and drugs that I'm genetically predisposed to have kicks in, and I want more and more and more. And then I burn to the ground again. And then I get sober, family gets on board. Maybe this is the time that I'm in treatment. And then I start feeling better. I'm 3 months in and I haven't done any work. And I decide, you know what, let's try that one more time. Boom, sets aside. So this is the cycle, the cycle, they call it the step one cycle. And so, when I'm working with men at Discovery Place, we sit down and we talk about like, okay, you guys are in the sober phase of that cycle now.
Right.
You're physically removed from alcohol and drugs. You're not physically craving it anymore.
Right.
You are now as sober as you're ever going to be. You can't get any more sober. So now let's talk about what's going on with you sober. What's going on in your mind? What's going on with your feelings? What's going on with that thing inside you that will make that decision to do what you right now would agree would be an insane thing to do, which is put a needle in your arm or take another drink.
Right. Yeah.
And so taking a look at that work is really important early on.
Yeah.
And that's why what we do here is the long-term deal, so like 3 months of intense work, because it's so easy to do 30 days of treatment and you're feeling great. I mean, and if we hooked you up to
I'm good.
I got this.
I'm never doing it again.
If we hooked you up to a lie detector test and said, man, are you ever going to drink again? You would say no, and you would pass the test.
I'm glad you said that, because that is something I often have to say to families when I'm working with them, because we assume as families that you're lying. And I'm always like, they're not lying.
No,
this is just how insidious this disease is. Right. And that's the thing we have to remember. You just said 3 to 6 months in phase one, you guys, we're giving people 30 days and sometimes 7, right? 7 to 10. And we think that they're supposed to just be okay because the physical part of the withdrawal is over, the emotional / neurological part of this disease is way harder to beat. Getting sober is not the hard part. Staying sober and figuring out all the stuff that you're talking about right now, that's the hard part.
Yeah. I mean, I was very unwell. I was very unwell. When you sobered me up, and I don't know how this is gonna sound, but like I was dangerous.
Yeah, no,
Like
I've seen
I
it.
was
Family members
dangerous
know this. We know this
know.
because we've seen it, right? We've
Yeah.
lived it. It's
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah. At 30 days sober, like I'm a loaded gun, really. And like I got a lot of anger, I got a lot of fear, I got a lot of just stuff going on with me. I'm just, fantasies going on in my mind and like things that aren't real, and I'm scared and I'm worried people are trying to manipulate. Just I'm a ticking time bomb, really. And so, but I'm feeling better physically,
Mhm.
and so for me at day 29 in the treatment center, here's what's going on in my mind. Man, I've wasted so much time. I need to get back to work.
Yeah.
I can't wait to get back with her, and I can't wait to have family dinners, and I
Yeah.
can't wait to see mama on Sunday. And like, I believe all this stuff. Like, I genuinely, because I've been living this hard life for so long. I'm like, oh my God, like, what a relief it's over. I can't wait to like get my life going in. And I believe all that stuff. But unfortunately, I'm tapped into this thing in treatment where I'm feeling really good and everybody's kind of supportive and we're talking about recovery. And then I drive off the parking lot and it's almost immediate
Right.
how quickly like that support, that thing goes away. And then I'm like, it's right back to the person at Kroger's not doing it right. They're not putting my bags together properly, or what, the person in front of me is driving a little too slow, and then I'm just getting a little frustrated and irritated. And then, mom isn't behaving the way I want her to. And,
It's
but
the
mom, I
pain.
just need, yeah, all that stuff.
Pain, right? It's the pain.
Yeah.
The pain with no coping skills that have been developed, zero coping skills. I mean, most people, when they've been using drugs and alcohol for a while, that's the only coping skill. That's it. There's nothing else that's developed, right? So you're out there, you're an exposed nerve with no ability to cope with the pain that's coming. And all that foundation of pain that we talked about earlier is now forefront. It's front and center. And this is why, and the reason why I'm saying this is because family members want in those moments so badly to listen and say, okay, you can come home.
Mhm.
But we are setting people up for failure when we do that. And it's
Mhm.
so hard as a loved one to say, no, you have to, I will support you, but you need to listen. I usually say, just tell them they have to listen to the people who are providing treatment, like the professionals, right? Just tell them to
Mhm.
listen to that. That's the only thing you'll support. You don't even have to say no. Just tell the counselor or the case manager that they can't come home, and then let them do the hard stuff. You just say, hey, I'm going to listen, whatever they're
Mhm.
saying, we got to go with. That's the only thing I'm going to support, because it's really hard
Mhm.
for us. But we need to keep people in a supported environment as long as possible. And this is why, right? Because what you're talking about, Joe, is neurological. We have science to back this up now. Your brain is, the second the pain comes, your brain starts screaming subconsciously for you to use drugs. You can't even consciously think about it in the beginning, right?
Mhm.
Treatment, 3 to 6 months. I always say a year. That's what I would love. I would love a year. Because that cortex, the outer part of the brain that's capable of complex thought, which I usually call the angel, right? It's an easy way to visualize this is the mid part of the brain that deals with survival, that's learned that the drugs are keeping you alive. That's really what it learns, is a devil. And then the cortex, which is capable of complex thought, can go, hold on a second, this might be killing us. But the devil's always going to talk first, especially in the beginning. And then if that angel isn't strong enough, right, and that hasn't grown, we're losing. And this is science. So we need as much time as possible in a supported environment to strengthen that angel. So when the devil starts, the angel can go, whoa, hold on a second. We already know where that brings us. I can't do that. But that's not going to happen overnight. 30 days for most people who have a progressed disease of addiction, right? 30 days ain't cutting it.
No, you're spot on. And I think that's if there was one message, like, when I'm out there talking with, state officials and hospitals and a lot of folks that aren't specifically in the treatment, recovery, addiction field, the message is, there's a big difference between being sober and being in recovery, and the healing process and like what needs to happen in a man or woman's life to heal and recover is a process. And and unfortunately, our society, I think, and we've talked a little bit about this in the past, but I think our society, it's gotten to this place where, okay, let's get you physically detoxed. That's the treatment, and you learn some new coping skills, potentially while you're there. But then now it's your decision, and your decision alone if you drink or do drugs again. And like you just eloquently put it, like there's a lot more to it scientifically. There's a lot more to it spiritually and internally, and in the mind and in the soul, and all of it, that is going to drive me back to the drink or the drug, even though I don't want to be that guy anymore.
Right.
I don't want to be the guy who's hurting my family. I never woke up in the morning. I'm not this guy who wants to hurt people. I never said, you know what, today's the day I'm going to break my mom's heart, catch a few felonies, and burn my life to the ground.
No.
Yeah, no, but I did those things.
Yeah.
Right. I did those
And that's
things.
why I often say, how do we know this is a disease? Because it's not human nature to stick your hand in a fire repeatedly only to get burned, right? Human nature is, if I get burned, I stop putting my hand in the fire. So if you're continually sticking your hand in the fire, there's some sort of disease process that has to be happening, right? Because neurologically, we are wired to avoid the burn, right?
Yeah.
So there's an illness that's definitely taking place. Well, thank you so much, Joe. I so appreciate you coming on. You have such a great perspective on all of this. I always love to hear, you talk, and I know families need to know this stuff and hear this stuff, because we don't know what the heck we're doing most of the time. And I feel like for most of us, by the time we kind of have an idea of what we're doing, it's usually after our loved one has already gotten well that we're like, oh yeah, that's how you're supposed to do it, right? Like it's typically how it goes, right? So we need to get this kind of information out there to families as much as possible so they understand what is happening and what the best course of action to take is, because what we're supposed to, or what works, is not what feels right, unfortunately, in this realm. And I say that because I want every mother out there, every father, every wife, every husband that's struggling with, but I want to wrap my love around them because I know that they're sick. And I want you to do that. We want you to do that, right? We want you to wrap your love around them. We just don't want you to fix all their problems and pay their rent and make sure that they're warm and fed, right? Because when you were using, if you had all those things, would you ever have stopped?
Absolutely not.
That's what it comes down to at the end of the day. And as somebody who loves someone, to watch them be cold and hungry is awful. It's awful. But sometimes we have to let them be a little cold and a little hungry at the hand of their own choice, not as a punishment, but at the hand of their own choices, in order to tip the scale in favor of the work that is recovery, that is incredibly painful, right? And scary. So.
Well, you're spot on.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before, but at the end, for me, I called my mother, Italian lady, said, Ma, can you put a pizza on your credit card and get it shipped to this address? And she said, you're breaking my heart. Hung up the phone.
Right. No.
And that was the most loving thing she could possibly do right then. And the truth about that is that 2 weeks later, I got sober.
Yeah.
That was June 2015. And for me, when Mama stopped swiping the card, it was like, oh no. Like,
right.
She didn't have the power to save me or not save me, but she did have the power to stop providing the resources that I needed so that I could spend my resources on drugs.
Yeah. Tipping the scale in favor of recovery, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we want to do, is tip the scales in favor of recovery, because you had a choice in that moment between pain and pain. There was no other choice for you. You either step into the pain that's recovery, sobriety/recovery, or you stay in the pain that is active addiction. Now, on the outside, we know the recovery pain has a light at the end of the tunnel, right? But somebody that's using, do they know that? No.
It's comfortable. Yeah.
And you have an immediate escape from the pain and the drug.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a tough choice to have to make. So I always like to say, anyone, including yourself, long-term recovery, my hat goes off to you. I have so much respect because I don't know that I could have done it. It's a hard thing to overcome. So, and I want all of you out there that are listening, I want you to hear that and understand that and have that empathy when you're watching your loved ones suffer, while also putting up boundaries, right? That's easy for me to say. It's very gray. It's not black and white. So get support. That's the biggest message at the end of the day, whether you're in recovery or you have a loved one, or you want to be in recovery or you have a loved one that's struggling with this, get support for yourself, because that's what we need. All of us.
Thanks so much for having me,
Yeah.
Kristin. Always awesome. Awesome
Thank you,
stuff.
Joe. You'll be a returning guest. I promise. I'll be
Sweet.
reaching out to you. And if you have any other
Awesome.
ideas for topics, shoot them out to me. If any of you out there in, Facebook land or Zoom land have some ideas on topics you'd like to hear, shoot them out to me too. You all have my email address. So